The grand spires of Zarathia Prime loomed against the backdrop of a swirling nebula, casting long shadows over the Imperial Palace. The planet, a beacon of power and control, stood as the heart of the mighty Zarathian Empire, ruling over 1,000 star systems. It was here, within these gilded halls of dominion, that a fragile negotiation was about to take place, one that could change the fate of an entire species. Selene Kaur adjusted the high collar of her diplomatic coat as she stepped off the sleek silver transport that had carried her to the palace grounds. Her movements were measured, her gaze unwavering. From the moment she arrived, she felt the suffocating air of deception that lingered beneath the grand welcome. The towering Zarathian guards flanking her path did not offer the usual respectful nods to foreign dignitaries. Their hands rested too readily on their weapons, their golden helmets reflecting the cold artificial light of the palace exterior. She was no fool. The invitation had been too sudden, the Empire too willing to discuss terms of peace after years of skirmishes and silent threats against the Terran Republic. Something was wrong. A procession of Zarathian nobles awaited her at the palace gates. At their head stood Vizier Kaler, the Emperor's most trusted advisor, his robes flowing like liquid metal in the evening light. His sharp eyes studied her, assessing her every move with the precision of a predator. "Ambassador Kaur," he greeted with a practiced smile. "Welcome to the heart of the Empire. His Imperial Majesty eagerly awaits your presence." Selene offered a courteous nod, her expression betraying nothing. "An honor, Vizier. I trust my arrival was anticipated." Kaler's smile did not waver. "Indeed. We have much to discuss." She followed him through the colossal archways into the palace, where gold and obsidian adorned every corridor. The wealth of the Empire was on full display, a reminder of their reach and dominance. But beneath the opulence, she could sense the undercurrent of tension. As they approached the Grand Hall, she caught sight of the Imperial Guards positioned at every possible exit, their presence too numerous for a mere diplomatic meeting. A trap. She knew it, yet she walked forward without hesitation. Inside, the Emperor waited, seated upon a throne carved from a single massive obsidian slab. His imposing form radiated authority, clad in ceremonial armor that gleamed under the ethereal glow of floating lanterns. Dorn Violith, ruler of the Zarathian Empire, was a man who commanded fear with little more than a glance. "Ambassador Kaur," he intoned, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You have traveled far to stand before me?" Selene met his gaze, her voice calm but firm. "And I do so with the hope that peace can still be achieved." The Emperor let out a slow breath, his fingers tapping idly against the armrest of his throne. "Peace? An interesting concept, considering your people have long defied the natural order of this galaxy." She tilted her head slightly. "If the natural order means subjugation, then yes, we have defied it." A murmur rippled through the nobles in attendance. Kaler's smile remained fixed, but she could see the flicker of annoyance in his expression. The Emperor, however, simply chuckled. "Bold words, Ambassador. But let us not waste time. You are here because the Republic believes it has a place among the great powers of this galaxy. I am willing to entertain such a notion, under the right circumstances." Selene folded her hands behind her back. "And what circumstances would those be?" Dorn leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Submission. The Republic will surrender its military assets and accept Zarathian oversight. Only then can peace be ensured." She felt the weight of 100 gazes upon her, waiting for her response. For a moment, she let silence stretch, allowing the gravity of his demand to sink in. Then, she smiled. "You misunderstand something, Your Majesty?" Dorn's brow furrowed. Selene took a slow step forward, her voice lowering just enough that only those closest to her could hear. "I did not come here to surrender. I came to assess whether your empire still deserves to exist." The words were a whisper of a storm to come, unnoticed by the lesser courtiers but fully understood by the emperor and his vizier. Kayla stiffened. The air in the chamber grew heavy. Then, with a sharp sound of metal against stone, the doors behind her slammed shut. The grand hall, once a place of calculated diplomacy, now brimmed with silent tension. The doors behind Selene Core had sealed with a finality that sent a ripple of unease through the gathered nobles. Every exit, every corridor was accounted for, and every guard stood ready. A well-orchestrated performance, and she was meant to be the captive audience. Selene's expression did not falter. If the emperor expected her to cower, he would be sorely disappointed. Instead, she allowed a slow breath to fill her lungs, her fingers brushing the inner lining of her coat where something small, metallic, and reassuring rested. Emperor Dornvioleth steepled his fingers. "You came here under the impression that you had leverage, Ambassador. That was your first mistake." Vizier Kaler, standing at the emperor's right, tilted his head ever so slightly. "And your last." A flick of the vizier's wrist, and the chamber erupted into motion. The Zarathian guards surged forward, their golden-plated armor shifting as their weapons trained on her in unison. No grand speeches. No posturing. Just the simple efficiency of an execution. Selene, however, was already moving. With a practiced fluidity, she twisted to her left, grabbing the wrist of the nearest guard and yanking him forward just as the first plasma bolt tore through the air. The shot meant for her instead carved through the soldier's chest plate, sending him staggering back with a strangled gasp. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Nobles scrambled away in terror as guards attempted to contain the sudden violence. But Selene was a blur. She ducked, pivoted, and with a precise strike to the throat, sent another guard crumbling to the ground. Her hand slipped inside her coat, retrieving the sleek, compact device hidden within a disruption charge. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it toward the nearest light panel. The explosion was small but effective. Sparks rained down as half the room plunged into shadow, giving her just enough cover to move. Dornvioleth's eyes burned with fury. "Kill her." Selene dashed forward, weaving through the confusion. Two more guards lunged for her, but she anticipated their movements. A sharp elbow to the jaw sent one reeling, while a sidestep caused the second to stumble past her. In that brief opening, she sprinted toward the nearest pillar and leapt onto its base, using the momentum to vault herself up toward the balcony above. She landed in a roll, immediately pressing herself against the railing to scan the situation below. The emperor had risen from his throne, his face twisted in a scowl. He was used to being in control, and Selene had just shattered his illusion of dominance. Kaler, however, was not rattled. The vizier's calculating gaze remained locked on her, even as the guards below scrambled to re-establish order. And then he moved. Unlike the cumbersome soldiers, Kaler's approach was deliberate. His robes barely made a sound as he ascended the staircase toward her. Selene could already see it in his stance. He was not merely a politician. He was trained. Dangerous. She exhaled. This had just become significantly more complicated. The vizier struck first. A lightning-fast jab aimed for her ribs, but she twisted just in time, redirecting the force. He followed with a second attack, a calculated sweep meant to unbalance her, and for a split second, she nearly lost her footing. Selene recovered, barely. She countered with a palm strike to his sternum, but Kaler shifted his weight, absorbing the impact with an almost effortless grace. "I expected more from the fabled Terran operative," he mused, his voice maddeningly calm. Selene smirked despite herself. And I expected less from an Imperial lapdog. Kaler's eyes flickered, a hint of amusement beneath a cold calculation. How unfortunate for you. He lunged again, faster this time. Selene had no choice but to evade. She sidestepped, twisting just as his blade, a thin, concealed vibro dagger, sliced through the air where she had been standing. Too close. She needed to end this. Now. A quick glance downward showed that the guards were already reorganizing, cutting off her exits. The Emperor was barking orders, and within minutes, reinforcements would flood the palace. Selene made a split-second decision. She ducked under Kaler's next strike and grabbed hold of the sash at his waist. Using his momentum against him, she twisted her body, flipping him over the railing. Kaler barely had time to react before he plummeted downward, crashing onto the marble floor below. He landed hard, but not fatally, though she had no doubt he would be furious. With no time to waste, Selene sprinted along the balcony edge, locating the nearest stained glass window. She reached into her coat once more, retrieving a secondary charge. A press of a button, a single second's delay, and then the explosion shattered the window into 1,000 glimmering shards. Wind howled into the chamber as the city skyline stretched out before her, bathed in the eerie glow of Zerathia Prime's nebulae. Without hesitation, Selene leapt through the broken frame, disappearing into the night. The palace alarms blared behind her, and as she plummeted toward the streets below, she allowed herself the briefest smirk. The game had just begun. The cold night air rushed past Selene as she plummeted through the sky, the shattered remnants of the palace window glinting in the city lights above. Zerathia Prime's capital sprawled beneath her, a labyrinth of towering structures, neon-lit sky bridges, and automated patrol drones humming through the air. She twisted mid-fall, angling her body toward the nearest rooftop. She hit the surface hard, rolling to disperse the impact. Pain lanced through her shoulder, but she forced herself to keep moving. The palace alarms still blared in the distance, echoing through the metal jungle of the Imperial city. They wouldn't let her escape so easily. Selene tapped the small device on her wrist, activating an emergency signal. If her contacts had followed protocol, an extraction point would be prepped within the hour. She just had to survive until then. A sharp whir filled the air. She barely had time to react before a bolt of plasma scorched the rooftop inches from her feet. She spun around, eyes narrowing. Above her, a squad of elite Zerathian hunters descended from hovercrafts, their sleek black armor blending into the night. Their leader, a towering figure with a jagged crimson visor, pointed directly at her. "There is no escape, human," his voice rasped through a modulated speaker. Selene smirked. "There never is." Then she ran. The hunters wasted no time. They dropped from their crafts in perfect synchronization, their pursuit relentless. Selene sprinted across the rooftop, vaulting over a rusted ventilation shaft as plasma fire erupted behind her. The city blurred around her narrow alleys, flickering neon signs, the ever-present hum of distant hover traffic. Her mind worked fast, mapping possible escape routes. A bridge. 20 meters ahead, connecting two buildings. If she could reach it. A shadow moved in her periphery. Too fast. Instinct screamed at her, and she twisted just as a blade slashed through the space where her throat had been a second before. A hunter had flanked her, his movements eerily silent. Selene countered, her elbow snapping into his visor with enough force to crack it. He stumbled back, but another was already upon her. She ducked under a sweeping kick, drawing the compact pistol hidden in her boot. A single well-placed shot struck the hunter's shoulder, sending him reeling. She didn't waste time. Pivoting, she launched herself toward the bridge, her muscles burning as she leapt. For a breathless moment, she was weightless. The ground yawned far below, the city stretching endlessly beneath her. Then she hit the opposite rooftop, rolling into a crouch. The hunters hesitated for a fraction of a second before following. She needed an edge. Something to slow them down. Her eyes darted across the rooftop, locking onto a maintenance console near the building's edge. It controlled the local energy grid. If she could override it. She sprinted for it, dodging another plasma bolt. The console's interface was archaic, but she didn't need precision, only chaos. Her fingers danced over the controls, rerouting power surges and overriding fail-safes. The moment she activated the sequence, the rooftop floodlights exploded, plunging the area into darkness. Shouts erupted behind her. Disoriented. That was her cue. Selene bolted for the nearest fire escape, descending into the depths of the city. The hunters would recover, but she had gained precious seconds. She activated her communicator again. Static. Then. Core, you're late. Selene exhaled sharply. Change of plans. I need extraction. Now. Coordinates received. Hold tight. She didn't have much choice. Behind her, the hunters regrouped, their visors glowing ominously in the darkness. The chase was far from over. Selene darted through the maze of alleyways, her breath coming in sharp bursts. The neon lights of Zerathia Prime's undercity flickered erratically, casting elongated shadows that twisted like spectral figures against the grimy walls. Above, the piercing hum of hovercraft signaled the relentless pursuit of the elite hunters. Their leader would not give up so easily. She forced herself to focus. The extraction point was 5 kilometers south, buried deep in the industrial sector where the Empire's surveillance network was weakest. If she could reach it, she had a chance. But every instinct told her she wouldn't get there unchallenged. A sudden hiss filled the air. Selene dropped low just as a plasma bolt seared overhead, scorching the alley wall beside her. She spun, her pistol snapping into her hand, but before she could return fire, a towering figure dropped into her path. The bounty hunter's armor was darker than the void itself, matte plates interwoven with advanced energy-dampening tech. A retractable blade gleamed from his gauntlet, its edge humming with deadly resonance. His visor pulsed a deep crimson as he spoke, voice distorted through a modulated filter. Selene Core. You've cost the Empire a great deal of trouble. She recognized him immediately. Rael Voss, one of the most feared bounty hunters in the Outer Rim. A former Imperial operative who had long since sold his loyalty to the highest bidder. Selene tightened her grip on her weapon. Voss. I was wondering when they'd send someone competent. The bounty hunter chuckled, a low, almost amused sound. You flatter me. But you know how this ends. With a flick of his wrist, he activated a secondary blade on his opposite arm. Selene barely had time to react before he lunged, striking with calculated precision. She twisted, narrowly avoiding the first slash, but his follow-up strike was faster. The blade grazed her side, a searing pain igniting through her ribs. She grit her teeth, rolling back to create distance. Voss was faster than she remembered. Stronger. Give up, Core, he said, circling her. You can't outrun me. You can't fight me. Surrender, and I'll make sure the Empire gives you a quick death. Selene wiped the blood from her side, smirking. Tempting. But I think I'll pass. She fired. 2 precise shots aimed for his center mass. Voss moved impossibly fast, twisting to avoid the first bolt and deflecting the second with his gauntlet blade. Before she could fire again, he closed the distance, knocking her weapon aside and slamming a knee into her stomach. Air exploded from her lungs. She staggered, but she refused to go down. Instead, she used the momentum, twisting around him and driving her elbow into the back of his helmet. He grunted but recovered instantly, spinning to deliver a brutal kick that sent her crashing against the alley wall. Pain flared through her body, but Selene had fought worse. She pushed off the wall, her mind racing. She couldn't beat him in a direct fight. Not like this. Then she saw it. A power conduit ran along the side of the alley, sparking intermittently from the city's unstable energy grid. If she could force him close enough. Voss lunged again, and Selene acted on instinct. She feigned weakness, staggering back toward the conduit. The moment he was within reach, she twisted, grabbing his wrist and using his own momentum to redirect him toward the exposed wiring. The conduit exploded in a shower of blue energy as Voss collided with it. Electricity surged through his armor, sending violent spasms through his body before he collapsed to the ground, his systems overloaded. Selene didn't wait to see if he was still breathing. She grabbed her pistol and ran. The extraction point was close. She just had to make it before the Empire sent something worse. Selene's heart pounded as she sprinted through the industrial sector, weaving between towering machinery and rusted storage containers. The extraction point was close. Just a few more meters. Her COMM crackled to life. "Core, you better be there," came the gruff voice of her contact, Dane Hallow. He was a smuggler, unreliable but the best chance she had. "I'm coming in hot," Selene gasped. "Did you bring the ship?" A pause. "Yeah. But we have a problem." Her stomach tightened. "What kind of problem?" Before he could answer, the roar of engines filled the air. Selene skidded to a stop behind a stack of cargo crates and peered around the edge. Her extraction ship, a battered old freighter, hovered just above the ground with its loading ramp down. But standing between her and the ship were 5 armored figures. Imperial enforcers. And Dane. Her fingers clenched around her pistol. "Hallow, what the hell is this?" The smuggler's voice came over the COMM again, this time tinged with regret. "I had no choice, Selene. They tracked the signal. They made me an offer." Selene's jaw tightened. "You sold me out." "I'm sorry," he said, and she could almost believe he meant it. But sorry wouldn't save her now. The lead enforcer stepped forward, his stance rigid with authority. His helmet was adorned with a sigil of the Zarathian Empire. "Selene Core," he announced, his voice cold and mechanical through the modulator. "You are under arrest. Surrender, and your execution will be swift." Selene's mind raced. The odds were terrible. 5 enforcers, plus Dane. She had nowhere to run. Then she spotted it. The fuel storage tanks behind them. If she could get a shot off. She moved before she could second-guess herself. In a blur, she dove to the side, rolling behind another set of crates as plasma fire erupted around her. She fired back, aiming not at the enforcers but at the fuel tanks. The explosion was instant. A shockwave of fire and debris engulfed the area, sending the enforcers flying. The freighter lurched as the blast rocked the landing pad. Dane was thrown backward, crashing hard against a crate. Selene didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the ship, dodging falling debris. The loading ramp was still down. She leapt, grabbing the edge and hauling herself inside just as more Imperial reinforcements swarmed the area. She slammed the control panel, sealing the ramp behind her. "Get us out of here," she shouted at the pilot. The engines roared to full power, and the freighter shot skyward, leaving behind the wreckage of the extraction point. Selene slumped against the wall, breathing hard. Dane had betrayed her. The Empire was closer than ever. And now, she was running out of places to hide. She had only one option left. She had to take the fight to them. The cold, artificial light of the hidden outpost flickered against the dark metal walls. Selene sat motionless, her fingers curled around the hilt of her dagger. The echoes of distant footfalls sent a shiver down her spine. Every second in this forsaken place was borrowed time, and she knew it. Across from her, Commander Valen paced restlessly. "We have only a few hours before the Imperium forces arrive," he muttered, his sharp eyes scanning the encrypted message on his wrist device. "They are already aware of our movements. Someone betrayed us." Selene exhaled slowly. The weight of exhaustion pressed against her, but she could not afford weakness. "Who?" she asked, though deep down, she already suspected. Valen clenched his jaw. "The informant we extracted last night. I believe he sold us out before we could extract any useful intelligence." Selene swore under her breath. "Then we need to move. Now." As if to confirm her urgency, an alarm blared through the outpost, red emergency lights painting the dim corridor in an eerie glow. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Hostile ships detected. All personnel, evacuate immediately." Valen's face hardened. "We're out of time." Selene tightened her grip on her dagger and turned toward the exit. The corridors trembled as explosions rumbled from above. The Imperium was here, and they would show no mercy. The hangar bay was a chaotic mess of fleeing rebels and emergency sirens. Fighters scrambled into ships, mechanics abandoned their tools, and defensive turrets hummed to life. Selene and Valen pushed through the frantic crowd toward their designated ship, a sleek black cruiser designed for speed rather than combat. A sudden explosion tore through the far wall, sending a shockwave of debris and fire cascading through the hangar. Selene was thrown backward, pain lancing through her ribs as she hit the cold steel floor. Valen reached for her, pulling her up just as a squad of Imperium soldiers stormed in, weapons raised. "Go!" Valen shouted, drawing his own weapon and firing into the advancing soldiers. Selene hesitated for only a fraction of a second before sprinting toward the ship. A laser blast seared past her shoulder, barely missing her. She dived into the cockpit and activated the ship's launch sequence. Valen fought his way to the ramp, taking cover behind scattered cargo. "Selene! Get this thing in the air now!" Another explosion rocked the hangar. The cruiser's engines roared to life as Selene gritted her teeth and gripped the controls. The ship lifted off the ground just as a squad of soldiers opened fire. Valen jumped onto the ramp, barely hanging on as the cruiser shot out of the hangar into the dark expanse of space. Selene navigated through the chaotic battlefield, dodging incoming fire from Imperium fighters. The cruiser shuddered as blasts of plasma energy struck its shields. "They are tailing us," Valen called from the co-pilot's seat, frantically typing coordinates into the ship's navigation system. "Jump to hyperspace, now!" Selene didn't hesitate. With a final push on the controls, the ship lurched forward, stars stretching into long streaks of light as they made the jump to safety. Silence fell over the cockpit. Both Selene and Valen breathed heavily, their bodies tense from the narrow escape. "That was too close," Valen muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. "We need to figure out our next move before the Imperium tracks us again." Seleni's gaze hardened. No more running. It's time we take the fight to them. Valen met her eyes, hesitation flickering across his features. You have a plan? Selene leaned forward, activating the ship's holomap. I know exactly where to strike. And this time, we won't just escape, we'll dismantle their operations from within. Valen exhaled sharply. Then let's make them regret ever crossing you. As the stars swirled outside their cockpit, Selene knew there was no turning back now. The Imperium had hunted her for long enough. It was time for them to fear her instead. The ship drifted through hyperspace, its engines humming in the eerie silence. Selene sat at the control panel, staring at the endless void outside. The weight of what was coming pressed heavily on her chest. They were no longer just fugitives, they were revolutionaries with a target on their backs. Valen, seated across from her, studied the star charts. The Imperium's supply chain is vulnerable. If we hit their fuel depots, their fleets will be grounded. Selene nodded but remained deep in thought. It's not just about striking them where it hurts. We need allies. More than just a few rebel cells scattered across the sector. Valen sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. You want to unite the outlaws, the warlords, and the mercenaries. That's a dangerous game. Selene met his gaze. A game we must play. The Imperium is strong because they divide and conquer. If we want to win, we have to do what they fear most: stand together. The first stop was the desert moon of Atheris V, a lawless outpost where smugglers and ex-soldiers gathered. The cantina was dimly lit, filled with a scent of spice and desperation. Selene stepped inside, her hand resting near the hilt of her blade. At the center of the room sat Garrick Kane, a former general turned war profiteer. His cybernetic eye glowed faintly as he regarded Selene with amusement. Well, if it isn't the infamous diplomat turned warrior. To what do I owe the pleasure? Selene didn't waste time. I need an army? Kane chuckled, sipping his drink. Armies cost money, and you don't look like you have enough. She slid a data chip across the table. Coordinates to an unguarded Imperium vault. Enough credits to fund a rebellion. Kane examined the chip before grinning. You have my attention. The next recruit was a wildcard NYX Draven, a rogue pilot with a notorious reputation. Finding her was easy. Convincing her was another story. Selene tracked NYX to a high-stakes gambling den, where the pilot was in the middle of a heated game. Without hesitation, Selene sat across from her and pushed a stack of stolen credits forward. One game. If I win, you join me. NYX smirked, dealing the cards. And if I win? Selene met her gaze. Then I walk away, no questions asked. The game was tense, each move calculated. But Selene had studied NYX long before this meeting. She knew exactly when the pilot would bluff. When the final card was revealed, NYX let out a laugh. You're dangerous. I like that. She stood, extending a hand. All right, I'm in. Let's cause some chaos. One by one, Selene gathered warriors, spies, and defectors. Each had a grudge against the Imperium. Each was willing to fight. As they regrouped on a hidden asteroid base, Valen stood beside Selene, watching as their ragtag army assembled. This is madness, he muttered. Selene smirked. No. This is the beginning of the end for the Imperium. As the assembled fighters roared in agreement, Selene felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. The storm was coming. And this time, they would be the ones to strike first. The asteroid base was alive with movement. Fighters prepped their ships, weapons were calibrated, and battle plans were finalized. The once scattered factions had united under a single purpose to cripple the Imperium and spark a full-scale rebellion. Selene stood before them on a raised platform. Her voice was calm but firm, cutting through the murmurs of anticipation. We strike tonight. The Imperium believes itself invincible, but it bleeds like any other beast. Our target their central supply depot on Relos Prime. Without it, their fleets will be stranded. A low murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Valen, standing at her side, stepped forward, bringing up a holographic display of the facility. The depot is heavily guarded, but they won't expect a direct assault. We use speed and precision. Our goal is to disable their fuel reserves and take out their command center. NYX Draven, the rogue pilot, smirked. Sounds like fun. What's our exit plan? Selene met her gaze. We make it out because we have no other choice. Let's move. The fleet emerged from hyperspace just outside Relos Prime, their ships slipping through the planet's defensive perimeter undetected. NYX led the aerial assault, her squadron of modified fighters weaving through the sky like shadows. Selene and Valen, along with a team of elite ground operatives, infiltrated the depot through a service tunnel. The air was thick with the scent of fuel and metal. The plan was simple: plant explosives, disable the main power grid, and get out before reinforcements arrived. They moved swiftly, eliminating guards with silenced shots. Selene pressed a device against the central fuel conduit, setting the charges. 5 minutes until detonation. Let's go. An alarm blared through the complex. The Imperium had discovered them. Valen cursed. We're out of time. A wave of soldiers poured into the depot, rifles blazing. The rebels returned fire, taking cover behind cargo crates. Explosions erupted as the facility began to collapse. NYX's voice crackled through the comms. We need extraction now. Selene and Valen sprinted toward the rendezvous point. A dropship descended, its side doors sliding open. Just as they were about to board, an Imperium commander stepped forward, weapon raised. He smirked. You really thought you could win? Selene didn't hesitate. She lunged, driving her blade into his chest. As he fell, she turned back to Valen. We're not winning yet. But we will. The dropship lifted off, escaping just as the depot erupted into flames. Below, the Imperium's fleet scrambled in chaos, their supply lines severed. The first strike had landed. As the ship soared into the dark abyss of space, Selene exhaled, gripping the edge of her seat. This was only the beginning. And the Imperium had just been given a reason to fear them. The victory on Relos Prime had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Imperium, once thought untouchable, had suffered a crippling blow. But Selene knew the battle was far from over. Retaliation was inevitable. In the depths of the Imperium's central command, Supreme Chancellor Orlan watched the burning remains of Relos Prime's supply depot through a massive holographic projection. His expression was one of cold fury. They believe they can challenge us. They believe they can win. They are mistaken. His top officers stood in a tense semicircle before him. General Kale, a hardened strategist with a reputation for ruthlessness, stepped forward. Our intelligence has located the rebel fleet's staging ground. They are using an asteroid belt as cover. A full-scale assault will crush them before they can organize another attack. Orlan nodded. Mobilize the fleet. No mercy. Wipe them from existence. On a hidden asteroid base, Selene stood at the war table, examining a series of intercepted transmissions. Valen, standing beside her, read through the data grimly. They are coming for us. And they are bringing everything they have. NYX leaned against the console, arms crossed. That didn't take long. How bad is it? Valen exhaled sharply. Worse than we expected. They are sending an entire fleet. We're outnumbered 10-1. A heavy silence filled the room. The rebel forces had grown, but they were still a fraction of the Imperium's military might. This was not a battle they could win through sheer firepower. Selene straightened. Then we don't fight them head-on. We use the battlefield to our advantage. We turn the asteroid field into a weapon. Garrick Kane, the former general turned warlord, smirked. You want to lure them into a trap? Selene nodded. We know this terrain. They don't. We rig the larger asteroids with explosives, scatter false energy signals to mislead their tracking systems, and force them into a bottleneck. If we can isolate their lead battleships, we have a chance. NYX grinned. Now that's the kind of chaos I like. The Imperium fleet emerged from hyperspace, its sheer size eclipsing the surrounding stars. At its center, the massive dreadnought Judicator led the charge, its cannons primed to erase the rebel stronghold from existence. All ships, advance, General Kale ordered. Crush them. The rebel fleet remained hidden, concealed within the dense asteroid field. Selene watched from her command deck, her fingers clenched into fists. Wait for my signal, she said over the comms. The Imperium fleet pushed forward, maneuvering through the rocky terrain. Just as they neared the designated coordinates, Selene gave the order. Now! Explosions erupted across the battlefield as rigged asteroids detonated, sending massive debris into the path of the Imperium's ships. Smaller vessels were torn apart instantly. The larger battleships struggled to navigate through the chaos, colliding with one another in the confusion. NYX's squadron launched from the shadows, striking the disoriented fleet with surgical precision. Garrick Kane led the ground forces, boarding disabled enemy ships and turning their own weapons against them. On the Judicator, General Kale gritted his teeth. They are using the field against us. Adjust formation. Pull back. But it was too late. A well-placed explosive shattered a massive asteroid, sending it hurtling toward the dreadnought. The impact sent shockwaves through the ship, disabling key systems. Selene's voice rang through the comms. Imperium command ship is crippled. Focus fire. The rebels unleashed everything they had. The Judicator's shields flickered and failed. Moments later, the once indomitable battleship erupted in a blinding explosion. The Imperium fleet, now leaderless and in disarray, began to retreat. The rebels had won. But the cost of victory was yet to be seen. As the battlefield fell silent, Selene exhaled, exhaustion weighing heavily on her. This isn't over, she murmured. They'll be back. And next time, they won't underestimate us. The war had only just begun. The battlefield lay silent in the aftermath of the rebel victory. Wreckage from the Imperium fleet drifted through space like the remains of a fallen titan. Fires still burned in the remnants of the Judicator, the once mighty flagship now reduced to little more than a lifeless husk. The rebels had struck a decisive blow, but Selene knew better than to celebrate too soon. The war was far from over. On the bridge of the rebel command ship Eclipse, Selene stared at the tactical display. The Imperium had retreated, their forces scattered and weakened, but they were not defeated. A power vacuum had been created, and chaos was inevitable. Valen stood beside her, his face etched with both relief and concern. We did it, he said, breaking the silence. The Imperium suffered a loss they won't recover from easily. Selene didn't look away from the display. And now they'll come back with something worse. We wounded them, but we didn't kill them. They'll find another leader, another fleet, and they'll strike again. NYX's voice crackled over the comms. You know, most people would take a second to enjoy their victories. But I suppose paranoia suits you. Selene sighed. We need to be ready. There's no time for celebration. Valen crossed his arms. Then what's the next move? Selene exhaled, finally tearing her gaze away from the screen. We rally the systems that still live under the Imperium's control. They need to see that rebellion is possible. That the Imperium isn't invincible. If we don't move now, we'll never get another chance. Garrick Kane entered the bridge, a smirk on his scarred face. So you're planning to turn this into a full-scale revolution? Selene nodded. That was always the goal. We can't stop halfway. We finished what we started. As the rebel fleet regrouped, messengers were sent to the outer colonies, spreading the word of the Imperium's defeat. Some worlds rejoiced, eager to rise up against their oppressors. Others hesitated, fearing that retaliation would be swift and merciless. The cost of rebellion was high, and not everyone was willing to pay it. In the heart of Imperium space, Supreme Chancellor Orlan sat in the shadows of his war chamber, his face twisted with fury. Reports of the battle painted a bleak picture: his fleet shattered, his most trusted general dead, his grip on the galaxy slipping. He clenched his fists. They think this is victory? They think this is the end. His voice was a venomous whisper. An advisor stepped forward hesitantly. Chancellor, our forces are still strong. The rebels have gained ground, but we can regroup. We can. Orlan cut him off with a glare. I want them erased. Every last one of them. No more caution. No more restraint. If they want war, we'll give them war. His orders were sent across the remaining fleets. Planets suspected of harboring rebels were to be punished. Entire worlds would burn as a warning. The Imperium had been wounded, but it would not die without a fight. News of the Imperium's counterattack spread quickly. Colonies that had shown support for the rebellion now faced annihilation. Selene watched in horror as transmission after transmission reported massacres. The Imperium was making good on its threat. Valen's voice was tight with anger. They are slaughtering civilians. This isn't war, it's extermination. Selene gritted her teeth. This is what fear looks like. They know they are losing control, and they are trying to crush hope before it can spread. NYX slammed her fist against the table. So what do we do? Sit back and watch. Selene shook her head. No. We fight. But not just for ourselves. For every system that stands on the edge, wondering if they should resist or surrender. If we don't act now, the Imperium wins. The rebels began a desperate campaign, moving faster than ever before. They struck at supply lines, liberated occupied worlds, and exposed the Imperium's atrocities to the galaxy. The tide was turning. More and more systems joined the cause, unwilling to live under the Imperium's shadow any longer. But the price was steep. Each victory came with heavy losses. Friends and allies fell in battle. The fleet was stretched thin. The war had become a test of endurance, and only one side would be left standing at the end. The final confrontation came on the world of Orion V, a crucial stronghold for both sides. The Imperium had fortified it heavily, knowing that if it fell, their power would crumble. Selene knew it would be the battle that decided everything. As the rebel fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the Imperium was waiting. Warships filled the sky, cannons blazing. On the ground, soldiers clashed in brutal combat, neither side willing to give an inch. Selene fought at the front lines, leading her forces through the chaos. Valen covered her flank, his blade cutting through enemy ranks. NYX's squadron weaved through the air, striking down enemy bombers before they could reach the ground troops. Orlan himself arrived on the battlefield, determined to crush the rebellion with his own hands. The final battle became a brutal dance of destruction. One by one, the Imperium's defenses fell. Their soldiers began to waver. Their ships pulled back. And then, at long last, Orlan was cornered. Selene faced him, bloodied but unbroken. He sneered at her, his once imposing presence now diminished. "You think this means anything? The Imperium is eternal. Even if you kill me, someone else will rise." Selene leveled her blaster at him. "Then we'll be ready." A single shot rang out. Orlan fell. The war was over. The Imperium had collapsed. What remained of its forces scattered, leaderless and broken. Across the galaxy, people cheered. The era of tyranny had ended. Selene stood atop the steps of the newly liberated Orion V, addressing the crowd that had gathered. "We fought because we had no other choice. We stood because no one else would. And today, we are free. But freedom is not given, it is earned, protected, and defended. The Imperium is gone, but our work is not finished. We must rebuild. We must ensure that no tyrant ever rises again." The cheers of the people echoed through the streets. The galaxy had been reborn. As the sun rose over Orion V, Selene finally allowed herself a moment of peace. The war had taken everything from her home, her past, her innocence. But in the end, it had given her something greater. A future worth fighting for. And with that, she turned to face the horizon, ready to lead a new era.